Okay, it's Tuesday, May 6th. I'm Scott Woods, and I'm here with Phil Dellio. Phil normally is the one hosting these shows. I guess we're considering this an episode of What They Said. Actually, it's a follow-up to
Yeah.
the Dylan, a complete unknown episode we did a few months ago. And on a sad note, unfortunately, we don't have Stephen Rubio this time to join us. Sad to note that Stephen passed away on, I actually did want to get the date right on this, March 28th, I believe. So just a month and a half or so ago. We were shocked by the news, of course, very saddened by it. We did know he had taken ill not that long after we did that conversation, I think. I looked at his blog, and his last entry, I think, was maybe just a week or two after that conversation. So we were hoping to obviously meet up with him again and meet up with him many more times over the next, however many years. But unfortunately, he left us early. I think he was 70 years old, so too young, of course, by our standards. And we're going to miss him. So I think we want to say a few words in appreciation of him. And I'll start because I did know Stephen quite a while, just a few years before you, I think. I got to know Stephen in, I'd say around 2000, 2001. It was through the website I started, rockcritics.com. That site sort of launched, I think, around 1999, but it's probably around I'd say 2001 or so, where we first connected. I don't remember precisely, but I do remember what our connection was built around. It was actually around Pauline Kael. Um, he was very he sort of praised one of the things he really liked about the site, and I can't remember if it came through in a comment or maybe he might have even emailed me. Because one thing I did do at rockcritics.com back then is I devoted a lot of coverage to Pauline Kael, who wasn't a rock critic, of course, but he appreciated that. I think he got to the site because he is also a fan of rock criticism, but he was a huge fan of Pauline Kael. And I think that just sort of spoke to him that, the site would do that as well. And he would contribute a lot of comments. Well, that was, I think eventually rockcritics.com did have a comment section, and I know he would be in there fairly frequently. And at some point, we started getting in touch a little bit by email. He participated in the Robert Christgau and Real Marcus exchanges. As it turns out, he knew Marcus from many years before. But anyway, we were in touch by email a few times. And
Scott,
go
Scott,
ahead, Phil. Yeah.
was going to say wasn't Stephen in one of Marcus's classes?
Yeah, I don't know if he was in his class. I was listening again to my interview with him, which I was just going to mention. I think what he said was that maybe he was initially in one of, I think you're right. I think he was in one of his classes, but then the way they actually got to know each other a little better was I think Stephen ended up having an academic life, and I think they both taught for a while. I don't think it was at Berkeley. It was a Southern Cal or something. My knowledge of California universities is not very good, but they taught for a time at the same college, I believe, or the same university. And the way Stephen described it in this interview was he became sort of friendly with Brill, and he would just kind of go knock on his door in his office, and they would talk about music and stuff like that. So that's leading up to what I was going to say. In 2006, I really became a fan of Stephen's blog. Has to be one of the longest running blogs out there, really. I mean, he started the blog that you can find online still, and I can put the link to it in this clip and everything, is called Stephen Rubio's Online Life. And the first post in that, I think, is 2002, but I believe it was preceded by an earlier version that just had a more limiting audience, or it was on a more limited platform. He's
Wasn't it,
referred to it. It wasn't Blogger, but it was something pre-Blogger, and I think he even did that for a few years, like going back to the '90s. So he's
wasn't it
at it for a long
something
time.
wasn't it something called or part of something called Bad Subjects?
Bad Subjects, I think, was actually a publication that he contributed
Okay.
to. Um, he did a
No,
lot of writing. So anyway, like, yeah, I want to let you chime in. We can both share some thoughts about it, but just that's kind of my context with Stephen. knew each other through rockcritics.com. I became a big fan of his blog. I would comment on it once in a while. And then I decided I was just very interested with how he did his blog. And blogging was still, kind of in its infancy around 2006, from having any sort of reach publicly. And so I really wanted to get his perspective on what drove him to do it. And I re-listened to the interview recently. I'm thinking of maybe putting it back somewhere online. It's quite a good interview, actually. Stephen, he just talks very candidly and with great transparency about what he's doing and very unassuming. But he just had an interesting sort of perspective and way of talking about blogging in particular, and sort of well, it's not a big deal. I'm just writing about my life, and that's what my blog reflects. But amazingly, his blog basically has lasted until the end of his life. So that's like a hell of a run for a blog. I don't know anyone whose blog I was looking at back in those early days who kept at it for so long. So that's remarkable in and of itself. So
I think his last entry was maybe February 2nd. I should have
that
jotted
sounds
that.
right. Yeah, it was early February. Yeah.
And he always had like he would have a whole bunch of series going on. Like he would have Geezer Cinema. He would have Flashback Friday or something to some concert he'd seen. He always had like about 7 or 8 different things going on. They're not beginning to end. He would change them. He would come up with a new thing, and you could keep track of all those things.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, you alerted me to Stephen Scott. I don't know if we ever had any communication before. The first thing I guess I did with him was done with you, and you pointed this out or reminded me of it. We did the interview about Kurstigal on the occasion of his memoir being published, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Guess that was a three-way phone interview. Somehow you managed that.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to record phoners back.
Yeah, it's like 2006 or 7 or something.
Yeah.
Uh, and the next thing, my next involvement with Stephen was sort of what really solidified my long distance friendship with him, and that was what you and I had done the Facebook countdown of our favorite 50 songs, I guess. Facebook was actually useful then and new and kind of exciting. You weren't bombarded with ads. It was just you and your friends. So after we completed that, and Stephen, I think I'm pretty sure was part of our group who was following it and commenting on it. I wanted to do a movie version of it. And I think I ran it by you and I said, I should get in touch with Stephen and Jeff Pike, someone we also know from fanzine days. I knew you probably weren't as interested in counting down writing about your favorite movies.
Yeah.
So the three of us did it. And it was, again, just like the thing that we did. It was just great, and the writing, the entries started fairly short and they got longer and longer and turned into actual writing after a while. And one of the things I loved about this amused me to no end. I would put in films that I just knew Stephen probably winced at. Just like, is he serious? I mean, things like The Heartbreak Kid and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And he would always go off on his blog and he would review them 3 or 4 weeks later. And he would almost give them, every one of them, a 6.0. I actually hated this, but I like Phil and he's a good guy. So, it's not
That's hilarious.
Really a social media trying to top you guys.
Yeah.
Diplomatic as possible. Read between the lines. That just killed me. I remember once he gave something I wrote about a 6.5, and I said, I was like doing high fives and cartwheels around the room. Right away, I just picked up on the fact that, like you in the music critics we gravitate to, and Pauline Kael, but even almost maybe even more with Stephen, because you can throw Bill James into the mix. He had exactly the same influences I did, led by Kael, Marcus, and James. Like, to find somebody who worships those three writers, probably not that difficult, but that was a great thing. And after that, we started the What They Saws, which I loved because it was a great way to talk about new films. And then sometimes we go back. We did the Kubrick thing, the never-ending Kubrick thing, baseball films. And it was just a great venue, and I'm glad you suggested going forward with tonight because this is part two of something we started and talked about doing. We did the Dylan Complete Unknown, and we talked to Stephen. We said, let's extend that out to a whole bunch of other Dylan films. And we said, yeah, we were all sort of letting each other know what we were watching and how to watch it, where to stream it. And I'll hand it back to you in a second. The other thing I want to say is that Stephen was, like yourself and a few other people, so supportive of my books, whenever, and including the Trump book that we did. We didn't know Stephen when we did the earlier books. When I put out a new book, he would write about all of them, and I really look forward to it. And I was actually disappointed and he probably had health stuff going on, or God, maybe he didn't even like it, that he didn't write about the video book. I was checking every 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. I'm sure he would have got. I'm guarantee you he would have gotten around to it.
Sure, he would have eventually. Notes. Every time I talk to Stephen, he just talk. I got to have notes.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say, and I've sort of alluded to this already. He was so diplomatic when he disagreed with you, and it's like what I joked about on Facebook. He would always start off when we were doing what they saw us, and he just knew right away. He saw this film very differently. Stephen would I wish I could work. I wish I were an impressionist. I would love to do Stephen's voice. Like, he had such a distinctive voice, and I thought before we did this, I said I should really watch him and try to work up an impression. Yeah. Anyway, he would start by saying, "I don't disagree with anything you just said," and then he would politely disagree with everything you said. And he was so disarming in the way he did it. Like, he never took offense, And I remember one film in particular, the Italian film, Il Posto, which I love, and he really doesn't like that much. And this was one case where he was absolutely right. It shows that two people can see the same film and point out exactly the same things about it, and one of them can love it, one of them cannot love it. Like, amazing. I loved the exact same things that he didn't like about the film. Yeah. So it's actually fun to disagree with, which is a rarity on social media.
I think the thing about Stephen too, and it relates to that, is that he's just someone who, and we can say this about a lot of people that we know, but some sort of deal with it differently than he. But he was so passionate about the stuff that he loved, right? And he was both unsentimental about it, but also unsparing in his love for it. I mean, I love the fact. And I know this would be something that you would never relate to, but I'm sure it's something you might admire in him. I've had to recheck his blog. He saw Springsteen live 37 times. And with him, it's such a fun thing because every time he went, him and his wife, and I think Robin, who we should mention, of course, and, she spread the news, and we had a little bit of, conversation with her. And obviously our hearts go out to her and her family for this. But my sense from what he wrote is that they had a real bonding over their love of Springsteen. But it would be great every time he'd see Springsteen, like for the 35th time and the 36th time, he wrote a little something about it. He didn't try and go into great detail, probably knowing he'd seen him and written about him so much, but it just became more about the event itself and the fact that, I'm now on my 30. And there was, with no sort of boredom or cynicism or anything like that. He just genuinely loved to be sort of, swept up in that moment. And I really like that about him. I can easily fall prey to being cynical and sarcastic about things. And, I see someone as him as a model of just, looking at it from the more, I don't want to say I guess an optimistic lens, but there was just something very sort of heartwarming about the way he approached culture, and that would include like baseball and movie criticism and all that stuff. So
I think he was more loyal to his favorites than, say, I am. I mean, I spend so much time now just being really kind of sour about new Scorsese films and Neil Young albums, and he wasn't like that,
Yeah, no sourness really. So
yeah, who could we add to Springsteen? The two that come to mind for me are Sleater Slater Kinney. Man, I always
Yep,
mess up.
Sleater Kinney. Yep.
Slater Kinney, Pink.
Yep.
Someone who I really get very little out of. Stephen loved Pink. Um, going back, Jefferson Airplane, we had in common. Um, Anybody can think to
Well, I
add to
mean,
that?
I was looking through some of his. So Sleater Kinney, I looked them up, and I think at least as of the last entry that I could find, I wasn't doing it all chronologically. I think he mentioned that he had seen Sleater Kinney 11 times, which is like unthinkable for me. And I love Sleater Kinney as some of their stuff, but I just don't have that particular kind of direct relationship with any kind of band. But yeah, Sleater Kinney, he loved the Clash. I had It's interesting too. He kept up with stuff too. I mean, he's older than us. He loved Billie Eilish. I think he wrote about all
Yes,
her
he
albums
did.
when they came
He
out.
did.
And his tastes were vast, like everyone is. I'm sure he had pretty Catholic tastes, and in terms of music and movies and stuff like that. So
And I've got to mention the ongoing thing that Steve and I had about nostalgia. He would often say, you would be very critical of people who wallowed in nostalgia. And he took this with good humor. I point out to him now and again, going to your Springsteen thing, that he really was deep down nostalgic about a lot of stuff. He didn't give into it. He fought against it.
yeah,
But you can tell, I mean, anybody that writes so much memories about, things that happened when they're teenagers, nostalgia is part of it, right?
yeah.
And I think he kind of grudgingly agreed with me. But I think his point was always that there was new stuff to listen to and new films to go and see. And he'd rather be talking about them than, over the other stuff. I know we are going to move on to Dylan at some point. I wanted to show a couple of books here. This is a book that Stephen is in, which is just amazing. The Rolling Stones and I would kill to be in this book. There's an in joke that Scott gets and that Stephen would get. Talking about Pauline Kael, which is incredibly pricey, like $70 or $80.
It's like academic press, right?
Academic press, right? Those books are expensive by nature. I got a free copy because I promised the people that put it out. I don't know, maybe Wayne Stengel. I don't know. I promised I would write about it, and I did write about it. I honored my promise a couple of years later, but much to my surprise, it worked. Stephen has, and other people who are in this. We're not going to identify who's a Paulette and who's not, but we've got Ray Blount Jr., well-known writer, Martin Ellman, a Canadian writer, I think, Alan Barra, the baseball writer, David Denby. Whatever happened to David Denby? A whole bunch of other people, including Brian Kello, that wrote the Kael biography. And there's Stephen, right near the end.
Right.
His essay is called Kael's Influence, Expansive Subjectivity. So why don't I read the first paragraph, Scott, here, because you'll like it. If you visit the fine website, rockcritics.com, you will find out who you might expect there. There is an archive of interviews that includes such names as Richard Meltzer, Dave Marsh, Lester Bangs, Gene Arnold, Jim DeRogatis, Greil Marcus, and others. You will also find more than 24 separate postings tagged with the name Kael. You don't often see connections between movie critics and their rock critic counterparts. The Kael was close to 50 when rock criticism was making its first tentative steps in the world, only makes the connection more remarkable. Brackets, Marcus, probably the rock critic most influenced by Kael, released his first book, an anthology he edited the year Kael turned 50.
Wow.
I wrote about, what I wrote about the book, I should have check this again. Should have done my homework. Stephen had a particular slant in this essay that was very interesting. I think it was basically that he was writing as a fan. You know, a lot of the people in here were professional film critics or friends of Cale. He was neither, although maybe he had at some point some interaction with Cale. I don't know. Anyway, so I think that was the gist of the essay. And we should mention on Stephen's blog, he right at the top, he is a tribute to Cale. What's the line again?
I wanted to mention that for sure. I think it's a quote from her saying, people, something like, I don't have it in front of me, but people often ask me why I haven't written my memoirs. I already have.
I think I already have. Yes.
I think I already have. And I think, you know, I think that is true of what he I think he did live up to that promise on his blog, really. So,
yeah. And here's the other thing. This is actually a big deal. This is the baseball prospectus. I did a little research and I started in 1996. It's been home to many very famous baseball writers, including Keith Law, Nate Silver for a time. It was started by Joe Sheenan. Rob Nair used to write for them, and Stephen was an early writer. He's in this edition.
Wow.
This is the earliest one I have.
What do you write about? Like, because he was, and I'm not a baseball guy, but I know he was a similar to Springsteen. He wrote about every opening game of the San Francisco Giants, right? So
that's right. And one epic piece of writing he did. And nobody knew at the time they were going to repeat it 2 more times. He wrote this epic thing. And actually, I'll take some credit. I suggested to him that he do it because I said, you know, you should write something like Bill James wrote in 1985 when the Kansas City Royals won their first World Series. He wrote an epic thing when the Giants won the World Series in 2010.
Wow.
His blog. It was, you know, numerous parts. Now they won again in 2012, 2014. I don't think he or anybody else expected that. Here he is in the masthead for this issue. Unfortunately, they don't. That's one of these things.
Do they not credit the writers or something?
Socialist groupthink at Baseball Prospectus. They don't give individual credit. So I assume he wrote the Giants entry in here.
So what year is that one film?
This is the year 2000. Okay. So this is right in the smack in the middle, actually, let's say on the cusp of Barry Bonds' heyday. From 2001 to 2004, Bonds just turned baseball on its head, broke the single season record, the all-time record. People still argue about it. I know Stephen and I didn't see eye to eye.
I was going to say, you and Stephen argued a bit about Barry Bonds, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of a fence sitter about the whole steroid thing. Stephen, being very loyal and being in San Francisco and having witnessed, I think, all of this, he was probably there for both record-breaking home runs, was very loyal to Bonds and would get very, he would definitely get his back up if you started to attack Bonds. So anyway, he's got a real background as a baseball writer too, a very kind of Jamesian sabermetric background that still would show up whenever, you know, he talked about baseball.
Yeah.
Just an amazing guy, right?
Yeah. And maybe my final thought, and it sort of ties in with that. Another thing I looked at just before this conversation was, you know, the news was announced. It's still the only thing I've seen online so far. His wife, Robin, I guess, had access to his Facebook profile, and she went onto his Facebook profile and made the announcement. The amazing thing about that is there's like 130 comments from people. And when you go through those, you just realize, like, not that he had, you know, so many friends and so many people who liked what he did and were close to him, is just the range of interests and the way he connected. Like, some people were all about the baseball connection. Other people, you know, one guy said something like, Stephen kind of rescued me from my horrible taste in music by recommending me the 5 greatest albums of all time, and I took it from there. Like, it's really fun to kind of read that stuff, right? So, yeah, I mean, that was kind of a remarkable tribute in and of itself, and hopefully we'll see some other people chime in some way.
And I think both of us love the fact that he was right there in the, you know, tumult of the mid 60s, late 60s, right? He was at Berkeley. He
was a little, and I think, well, he wouldn't have been a student at Berkeley though, because he was born in 54.
He was a student. Right? That's what I mean. He was right in the middle of it.
No, but he wouldn't have been a student at Berkeley during
Oh,
because he was
okay.
born in
So
50. He's basically falls in between us and Marcus in terms of his age.
okay, okay. Sort
He's
of like
born in
Kim,
54, I think. So,
born in 54, so he's slightly too young. You're right. He sort of arrives a little later than that. But even being
oh, he was
witness,
part. He was part of it in his own. So, yeah,
yeah, it's a 12 or 13-year-old,
yeah,
sort of, I'm sure closely observing it. And
yeah.
he says, I was just rereading his Highway 61 blog entry, and he says that he doesn't know why, but at 12 years of age, he got like a Rolling Stone immediately.
Yeah, yeah,
Just got it. I understood everything about it. That was great.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, okay, how are we doing for time here, Scott, before we make the
Yeah, I
transition?
think maybe we should just start another call because we've got like 9.5 minutes, and I was more than happy to spend a good chunk of that time, little
Yeah,
whatever tribute we could offer to Stephen, and he may come up in the rest of our conversation. But
yeah, sure.